Man, time goes by quick, doesn't it? We're already to week 5 of the NFL season. Week 5. It feels like just a little bit ago, sitting there begging and itching for the regular season to start, and now we're already a quarter of the way through the season, which is where you start to get to the point in time where teams are trying to position themselves for the second half of the year, teams trying to decide whether they are real, legit, true contenders or at least playoff hopefuls, or if they're going to start going into wait until next year mode. Which brings us to Sunday, live from jolly old London, England. Hip hip cheerio, and I can't do an English accent to say my dang life. Get a matchup that should be interesting for the subplots, if nothing else. That is Khalil Mack and the Chicago Bears taking on Jon Gruden and the Oakland Raiders. Khalil Mack, the former number 5 overall pick of the Oakland Raiders in 2014 out of Buffalo, who was a multiple-time Pro Bowler, multiple-time All-Pro there in Oakland, only to see Jon Gruden come in spite of the fact you would think that having Khalil Mack on your team would be a reason that you'd want to take the job to begin with, ship him off before the beginning of last season to the Chicago Bears for a couple of first-round picks, and the rest, as they say, is history. The Chicago Bears were changed as an organization in that moment, and they have not looked back since, whereas you look at the Oakland Raiders now, and if you are a Raiders fan, you start to worry about whether things are going to get any better under Jon Gruden or if you're going to be stuck with this dude for a long, long time to come. Or maybe he'll get so tempted, apparently, by what his brother Jay is doing, sitting there smoking fatties and fucking with thoughts, and young thoughts at that. And let's face it, if you're Jay Gruden, your team is shits anyways, you hate your employer, what else would you do with your free time? I'm just saying. Yeah. I remember Kirk Cousins was here and, we were 9-7 and making the playoffs. So yeah, let's watch those highlights. Fucking fantastic, isn't it? Anyways, nonetheless, on to the matchup at hand. The Bears come in at 3-1 off of an impressive, dominant defensive performance against the Minnesota Vikings last week, a game the Bears really needed to prevent themselves from going to 2-2 and 0-2 in the NFC North. And they got that big-time performance from that defense in spite of not having Bilal Nichols, in spite of not having Akeem Hicks, in spite of not having Roquan Smith. You miss 3 notable starters on your defense and 2 real impact players, and you go out there and have your best defensive performance of the season. Whereas the Oakland Raiders come into this game at 2-2, coming off of a nice victory last week on the road over the Indianapolis Colts, all of a sudden you look at this Raiders team, and while they're not great, they're only 2-2. You look at the playoff picture in the AFC, whereas the Patriots and the Chiefs are clear-cut 1-2 and running away from the pack. Some of those teams you might have anticipated being in that playoff position, like the Steelers are 1-3, the Chargers are kind of scuffling along, the Ravens are just kind of there. You look at this and you say, if you're a Raiders team, if you're a Raiders fan, that a victory over the Bears in London could go a long way towards potentially making the playoffs this year. And the reality is that is absolutely true. And even if they lost this game with the Bears, they still have a chance to be able to, coming off of the Week 6 bye, put themselves in a position where they could be thinking about wild card. I mean, division is obviously out of the picture, barring some freak injury to Patrick Mahomes or something. But, I don't think this Raiders team is very good, but nonetheless, that is the reality of what they face in the AFC. So you take it as it is. Whereas the Bears appear to be in a bit of a dogfight in the NFC North. The NFC, I think, is clearly the superior conference, and the Bears play in arguably the toughest, deepest division in football. They're in a first-place tie with the Green Bay Packers, although Green Bay has the edge in terms of the Week 1 win. That gives them the tiebreaker early on in the year. The Detroit Lions are hanging around at 2-1-1. And you got the Vikings at 2-2. And if they ever really get their stuff together, that NFC North race could be something to watch the rest of the season. And when you talk about matchups and you look at how this thing could potentially play out, I could go through some of the things such as in this game, the Raiders need to be able to figure out a way to get some pressure on Trubisky early, which I think they've shown a little more flash in the pass rush department as a Raiders defense, but still not a ton. Better than last year, but how much is that really saying?
But that's kind of played out. I can make that argument every single week. When you look at the Bears, you could sit there and say, well, you would assume their defense is going to show up and the Raiders are going to have real trouble running the ball on the ground with Joshua Jacobs. So, again, it's like breaking down the X's and O's of all of this is only going to do so much good. I think there are really only two keys to this game that will ultimately determine who wins or who loses. Number one is, first and foremost, how did each team make the adjustment to going to London, having to travel during the week, deal with jet lag, deal with the media and all this other stuff? How did they deal with it? And who's going to be more focused on football and who's going to be more ready to play? Hopefully the Bears will be a little bit healthier. Perhaps Akeem Hicks will play. Maybe Roquan Smith will be back in the lineup. So that should make their defense arguably even better, which is really, really scary. So you say from a Bears standpoint, where the old rules kind of the thought is the defense always travels better than the offense on the road. Well, you can classify this as a road game for sure. The Bears have the vastly better defense. Raiders maybe having a little more experience in recent years playing overseas, playing in London. Maybe that experience could come into play here. But it just really comes down to, in a lot of ways, which team is able to better focus on the business at hand, the business of actually playing the game, will more likely than not be the team that comes away with the victory. And then there's number two. It's the Khalil Mack factor. This is the Khalil Mack revenge game. And you got to imagine, if there was ever a game that he was going to be pumped up for, that he was going to be primed for, that he's going to be ready to go for, that he's going to want to send a message on top of already being the stud that he is, it's this one. Oh, you want to trade me away, John Gruden? You want to send me somewhere else? You don't want to pay my ass? Here, I'll pay you back 1,000 times over. No take backsies. If Khalil Mack doesn't have a big-time game against this Raiders team and isn't in Derek Carr's face all throughout the game, then either A, John Gruden has structurally with his offense went about in his game plan to double and triple team Khalil Mack every time, which feels like a logical thing to do anyways, just in general, but really, really taking into account Khalil Mack and building everything that they do offensively in their game plan in this Week 5 matchup around not letting Khalil Mack go off and get his revenge on the Raiders. Or two, if Khalil Mack doesn't have a big game, then something really, really went wrong here. Because this is just setting up for Mack to have a monster day. Or because they pay so much attention to him, it allows a Leonard Floyd or somebody else to go off and have a big monster day. Ultimately, I expect this game to be either one-sided one way or one-sided the other. I don't know that it's going to be particularly close. I really, really don't. I like the Bears better here, even with Chase Daniel as the starter. You would assume here. I believe that's official now. It should be official. Now the Raiders have had a week to watch him on film of what he did in Minnesota, what's going to happen here. I'm going to go a little bit based off of what I saw in the first half of that game last week against the Vikings. Once Chase Daniel came in, that offense looked vastly different. They had rhythm. They had flow. He was reading the defenses, going through his progressions. He showed poise and calm and presence in the pocket, which has been severely lacking with Trubisky, even though Trubisky has more athleticism. You haven't really seen much of that this year, frankly. I just like the Bears too much in this matchup. I think they'll be able to go in there, handle business. Khalil Mack is going to be in a business state of mind. He's going to bear down on John Gruden, bitch. It's going to be something like 27-9. Bears smashing the Raiders. Yeah.